For the first question, what are the challenges of writing a serial as opposed to writing a novel?
So one of the biggest ones is with a novel, you have it feels more flexibility with the time frame for when you get it done. You can have a 7-day period where you just churn out a bunch of words and then 7 days where things slow down. With a serial, you have to keep a somewhat consistent output because you are publishing it in much smaller chunks on a more regular basis. And that really can kind of dictate how you write. With your multiple projects, you don't always get complete freedom to pick what you work on because you have an update due that next day.
That's the biggest difference and the biggest challenge. Obviously, the challenge to writing a serial. Although I have to say, I actually wrote a serial for ebook. I wrote a serial romance. My first serial was in ebook, so it was about a couple, and it was 5 episodes. So it was about 20,000 word episodes that all could kind of stand alone about this couple, but it was about the evolution of their relationship, and then it got very soap opera-y and melodramatic toward the end, which is the fun part of romance serials, honestly. But that, obviously, I had finished all of that before I published it. When you write for a serial fiction site like Wattpad or Radish, people come to rely on your updates. And if you don't update when you say you're going to, people get upset.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do.
Absolutely. That was honestly that's the most striking thing for me as well, is just the schedule. When you have an entire book in their hands, they read the book start to finish. When it's just a serial, if you don't publish for long enough, they'll forget you exist and just go on with their life. So that can definitely be a pressure to keep them engaged, to keep them excited. Absolutely.
And to piggyback off what you said too, if you don't update for a little while, you will lose readers who then might remember you exist and come back, and either A, they'll see you have been updating still, and so they won't check back again, or they'll come back and see, oh, now there's 30 bits, and serial readers are much more prone to wanting to read in short spurts. So if they come back and see, you have 30 more parts, they're like, oh, well, never mind.
Well,
Never mind, I don't want to catch up.
The other part that I was thinking about is it's not just of like you have to be writing, but you have to be writing that thing. So a lot of times, if you're writing series A and you want to take a break and write series B, you have to kind of weigh that over the fact that, unlike with books where they might be willing to say, oh, the author is writing for 6 months, you don't really get that with serials. So if you don't update that specific story, you run the risk of losing it.
I do think that's a really good point about serial readers not wanting large chunks of text. Like on Wattpad, obviously the readership is very international. So English is not everyone's first language, but the majority of the books on there are in English that most everyone can understand. I try to write, in really simple declarative sentences, maybe even present tense. That seems to be, for especially new adult romance, that works really well. But a lot of my readers are not from English-speaking countries, and I think that those short 1,500 to 2,000 word chapters really resonate with them.
Now, one of the things, I'll actually offer kind of a different viewpoint here, not to debate, but one of the things that I've found actually is on platforms like Royal Road or such, you oftentimes have the opposite impact where people want to binge read. And it's a mixture of where they want to just be able to read a whole story start to finish, but also that they're concerned that the author might not finish, because the reality is that many serial authors don't finish. So there is a phenomenon where a lot of readers will wait until a certain percentage of the story is completed, or a certain length of it, before they'll even pick it up.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think there's a strong inverse bell curve when it comes to serial readership. Like, you'll get a lot of people who check you out at first, and then for some, not interested, they just don't read anymore. Others, get distracted, forget about it, so it starts tapering off. Then you hit a certain critical mass, and at that point, you get people coming in because, okay, this person is still going. But I think it does illustrate a very important difference, as Tamara said, because Royal Road and Reddit and places where we do serialization are mostly English platforms, and so the readers, that's the native tongue. And I imagine it's probably much more intensive for someone to read in a different language. And I say imagine because I can butcher Spanish, that's about it. So I can't really understand how difficult that would be, but that makes sense that you'd have that, preference towards the shorter parts because that gives them a quicker, what for a native speaker would be a very quick read, for someone who is, still learning English when it's not native to them, it could be a much longer read. And after that, it's like, okay, I need to give my brain a break. I'm going to think in a reasonable language as opposed to English, which is a fun language.
Well, then we'll move on to the next question. How much do you think you need to have written out before you start publishing your serial?
Majority of my books, with the exception of 3, have all been written prior to putting on serial sites. And a lot of those were also self-published first. So I actually published a lot and then published them serially. I did publish that first serial, and romance readers in ebook, they're really on the fence with serials and cliffhangers. It's not their favorite thing, unlike other genres, except on Wattpad and Radish and serial fiction sites. That's where they love the cliffhanger. Usually those readers are younger. Usually they read in first person. Usually it's easier to blend tropes. But I would say for me, I just actually finished, I'm in edits on a traditionally published book right now. And actually one that is on Wattpad, and they're publishing it next year. In print. And so I'm in edits on that, but I couldn't start the edits until I finished a serial that I had started on Wattpad. And it was one of my few that actually I hadn't written first and that I kind of plotted and wrote on the fly. And for me, it's really exciting and really exhilarating. I'm a former reporter, so I like working by the seat of my pants. And actually I wrote one for Radish in real time, took it off Radish and put it up over the course of a month on Wattpad, and it got 1 million reads within 5 weeks. So, and it's turning out to be one of my more popular serials. But I will say it's much easier if you've written most, if not all of it. Like I'm not entirely certain I'll be doing anything on the fly anytime soon. It takes a lot out of you emotionally too. Mm-hmm. It's like it really takes up a lot of brain space, and it's like this constant, not just the obligation, but like the characters become so intense to you when you're doing it every day.
Mm-hmm. I have a very different experience. When I started writing, basically how I got my start and how many of my stories were born was by responding to writing prompts on various platforms. And then if readers engaged with a story, or if I was particularly interested in it, I could then take that, flash fiction response, basically 1,000 words, 1,500 words, take that back to my own platform with those readers who were interested in it, and continue that story and use that as a way to build my own platform and kickstart those projects. But because of that, I was basically railroaded into nothing written beforehand. And for me, that works because I know that I'm a procrastinator, and I will wait until the absolute last minute to write a chapter. And actually, my experience when I started that was I was going to start more slow, and I originally set my sights on a chapter a week. And what I found with that was I procrastinated until the very last minute. It became a chore. 1 week turned into 2 weeks. And so by not having backlog and by forcing myself to be in a position of, you gotta write or else you're not going to have anything to give them, that's what keeps me going. But, there are downsides like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And so I started off the same way as Casey. It's actually how we met, was we were doing those prompt responses at the same time in roughly the same area, roughly the same time. And that was hard to love my first ones too. And I very much ideally, I'd love to do what you do, Tamara, have the full book done. Because not all my serials have started that way. I wasn't really doing game lit from those prompts, so that became something I started doing later on. So in theory, I could have finished the book first and done that. In practice, I don't have the patience for that. I tend to finish the part and go, and now it gets in front of people. I want people to see what I've done, And so I keep pushing it out there. And like Casey, I will procrastinate until the very last minute and then beyond. And since I'm doing kind of the hybrid thing where I'm doing some serial stuff, some book stuff, that procrastination has made book writing a lot more difficult. I will get to the point where it's like, this is coming out soon, and I still have to write, 25,000 words the next 3 days because I have stalled too much. So,
yeah, no, it
Yep.
gets very addictive. I mean, it gets, when you release quickly, especially if you release like every day or every other day, it gets very addictive. And I will say, so next month I start a new romance novel, and I asked my agent, I was like, because Wattpad's going so well for me, I was like, maybe I should just put this up for free on Wattpad as a serial, and then we pitch it to them as a paid story, to writing it and rewriting it and then taking it to trad and getting rejected and going through all that. Part of me doesn't even want to submit it to traditional publishing. Part of me really wants to just write live for my readers. And of course, my readers are like, when are you giving us a new book? And I'm like,
Right.
I just finished a book on March 15th. Like, come on, people. But
that was 10 whole days ago.
They never stop.
Yeah. Part of me really, really would like to write live, but I also recognize that my books that aren't written live, for me, aren't as good as the ones that I did and thought about and had some time to digest. Like with romance, it's like you have to really layer in the emotion, and it's easier. Like if you're just writing pure like action and external conflict in a romance, it like you lose something in the emotion if you don't take your time with it. For me, anyway.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and for me, I find a similar effect in genre fiction is less the emotional stuff. I find that because it's not the centerpiece of the story, it's easier to get that in. What I find is the really bad temptation with doing the write and toss out right away is the adding new elements. You have this cool idea for a species or magic, and you're like, well, I can put this in here, that's fine. And because you're going a mile a minute, you then go, oh, that creates some whoops, I need to get that cleaned up.
So from there, I guess that kind of leads into a later question that we can bring up. What do you do, and this might be less applicable if you're pre-writing the whole thing, if you are serializing something live and you realize that you need to change something, you made a mistake, what do you do? How do you handle that?
I have 3 methods. It depends on how big the mistake is. If it's a small mistake, I try and just smooth it over, and it's one of those things where serial readers tend to be a bit more forgiving of that kind of thing. So those small mistakes, I just make sure that when I get the comments saying, hey, you said that this character had brown hair, they said they have blue hair, then I can just fix and edits for the book version, make sure I correct going forward. Then there's the moderate ones where I realize that something I established earlier was not right for the setting. This happened in Dragon Scion, one of my space fantasy, where I had in the early parts, I kept calling the casters wizards. And later on, I realized that was giving people the wrong impression of what they could do, what their abilities were. So I renamed them. And on that one, I just put a quick note on the top saying, hey, just in case you're wondering, this will be fixed for the book version, but going forward, wizards are now referred to as lumcasters to make sure it's clear what they're able to do. And then the last resort, the one you really want to avoid, but sometimes you have to do, is if you absolutely have to, sometimes you got to reboot. And that's usually if you're early enough in, you don't want to get too far in, unless you got to do a reboot. But if it's like, okay, what I have established no longer works, and I cannot just do an author note to retcon this, then you either need to push ahead with what you have, or if you can't do that, like you have created a complete maze for yourself and untangling it is going to be the Gordian knot, then you got to do it the Gordian knot, you got to cut it in half and just tell people, hey, look, this is going to be a better story after, I promise, please stick with me. And usually I found with serial readers, they tend to be very forgiving if it's early enough and you are very clear about what's going on.
So the ones that I have written live, I actually plotted them out pretty heavily. So that's how I avoided that. I think that if I were to publish any of those in print ebook, there would be things that I would smooth out, but all of them, the other thing is and I think that you have your jobs cut out in your genres a lot. It's a lot harder because you have a lot of moving parts. The core thing with a romance and with a romance serial is that you keep the focus on the couple pretty tightly. And there's not a lot of B plots or external conflict, or if there is, it's all surrounding the couple. So that's how I kind of make it easier on myself. The tropes are very clean cut and very, like, everything is pretty simple to make it easier on myself.
I think for me, it falls down to, like Alex commented, how severe the case is. I know that for the book that I just finished writing this month, The Librarian, there was a case where, like, I said that one character knew nothing about insert MacGuffin here. And then 10 chapters later, I realized, oh, I could do this whole big plot thing and make this cool plot twist. And actually, he does know something. He knows everything about that thing. And in that case, I kind of just kept writing as though nothing changed and hoped my readers didn't notice, because I was like 15 chapters to the end of the book and I didn't want to deal with it. And I had one reader comment on it that, oh, but what about this thing that you said before? And I said, actually, that's something that'll be changed in the book version. Usually, as long as it feels consistent enough, they don't really notice. They don't really care. There was one book series that I had, though, Spark of Divinity, where I had major issues that I realized about a book and a half into the initial trilogy, where the main character was just wildly unlikable. She was supposed to be aggressive. Her motivations were not good enough, so she came off as evil, which wasn't really my intention for her. So in that, I actually did put a big note on the top of the chapter just saying, hey, I'm going to make some changes. Here's what I'm changing. I'm going to continue writing from this point as though it was that way all along. And there were a couple platforms, like Royal Road, I didn't have it fully up to date on that, so I actually did a reboot on that because I hadn't updated it in a while. So I just scrapped the series there and started fresh. But everywhere else, you just leave a note and say, here's how it's going to be going forward.
I think also, I think that readers are forgiving. In romance, the readers are forgiving in general, but in some ways my readers are not, because I write very modern contemporary books that are set in the modern world. I think that makes people, I don't want to say fact check, but that makes people want have a higher level of consistency, because if it doesn't ring true to them, the whole story doesn't ring true. So that is an extra challenge for me. I think I try not, if I realize that I've screwed something with the plot up or am down a path that I should not be down, I just try to replot, because I try to keep it consistent with what I've written before.
I think that's a good point. And I think, speaking of the genre specific stuff, so with game lit and lit RPG, there's the system is a huge element of those stories, and that is the one area where inconsistencies are not particularly easily forgiven. There was a chapter for one of mine where I got the name for one of the characters' moves wrong, and I was using it wrong for the entire chapter, and I got about a dozen comments about that. While I was going through to fix that, I noticed that in that same section, I had given the person who was fighting in that scene the wrong name, and no one had commented. So the character's name changed, and they were like, okay, that's fine. But the system stuff changed, and they're like, no, you can't have that.
They will be particular about things you don't expect, and you just gotta learn how to roll with it. Well, on a related point, when you are serializing, how do you handle editing? At what point do you edit? What do you post? Where do you post the edited version?
So when I've written live, and I will say, well, actually one of the three that two of the three that I've written live were paid stories, were stories that people were paying money in real time. So I'm not saying that I don't do this for the one that I didn't get paid for, but I tried to really edit with Pro Writing Aid pretty heavily. And with one of them, the first one that I did, I had a friend, a critique partner, read some of the paragraphs and some of the passages, some of the chapters. Generally, that's what I do. The rest of the books that have been posted as serials have developmental editors and copy editors prior to me posting.
Bold of you to assume I edit.
Yeah,
But
I've read your stuff.
I'm getting better about it now. I very much used to be. I finish as soon as I hit that last, punctuation. I am copy, paste, publish, and that allowed me a higher speed and consistency. But my quality was definitely suffering from it. So I'm at the point now where what I'm doing is I'm at least running it through Pro Writing Aid to make sure that I am finding the obvious glaring problems. I'm also then doing a quick search through for any times I used was and any time I use the progressive tense, because I overuse both of those and they weaken the writing. So I do that and then I publish, unless the part's due and it's due that day and it is 11:59 when I finish. Then I will publish with a quick note, hey, get this on time. I am putting this out there right now. If you want to wait tomorrow, I'll be re-uploading the edited version. So that way I'm kind of splitting the difference between consistency and editing, because it's a lot more important than I gave it credit for early on in my everything.
For me, because I am writing live and because I am one of those people who understands that I have no self-control when it comes to posting, I do publish the first drafts, but one of the things that I have is a couple author friends who basically function as alpha readers, who are good at English, good at grammar. I read their stuff, they read mine, and we just comment on anything we see and act as a first line of defense for saying this just totally doesn't make sense. But for me, I also feel, because I'm serializing for free primarily, I do have things like Patreon, but because I'm serializing for free, one of the things that I think is important is keeping the finished, polished, edited thing for the book, because I think that that's one of the things that I can offer as an advantage to those readers who have followed along, and gotten it for free, rather than just asking for them to pay for something they've already gotten. I can say, hey, if you want it, here's the book. It's got pretty art on it. It's all packaged together and it's edited. So that's
a good point.
That's one thing that I think that, especially those of us who are doing free serials, that's a way you can still kind of hold the carrot out.
And I also do want to add too, because I think it's going to be a huge function of how cleanly you draft. Like, my drafting is getting cleaner, but I am not the cleanest drafter in the world. On the other hand, having read some of Casey's stuff, done some alpha reading here and there, she is a much cleaner drafter than I am.
It does make a difference. Just, in terms of your comfort level, and, I still have mistakes, but the mistakes that I have when I post are ones that I'm more comfortable do not stand in the way of enjoying the story. Well then, when you are serializing, how often do you think you need to upload, and how much do you upload in each burst when you do?
So for me, it kind of depends on the story, to a degree, because I'm a firm believer that the most you should have is weekly, and as most time you have between is weekly, and the shortest time you should have is going to probably be daily. I've seen people who do multiple updates a day. I don't know how they do it, and I pity their poor fingers. I think you've got that balance, but it depends on the story when it comes to how much. I plot my stories out in events, and an event is a bit more than a scene. I kind of think of it like the space in a TV show between commercial breaks. But I don't publish in events, because an event will be between 10 and 20,000 words and doesn't really have a solid resolution. So it's not like I could do the multiple novella episodic style. So I'll break them up depending on how much, but I tend to hit the 15 to 1,500 to 2,000 range as kind of a good middle ground. Rarely more than 2,500.
I think for me, I would agree in that I don't think you gain anything by posting more frequently than once a day. I see a lot of times authors will join a platform and immediately dump all of their chapters at once and say, here, have 15 chapters, because they say, well, now there's more content for readers to have. But the reality of it is that, especially on most of these platforms, you gain visibility by posting every day and having your chapter appear on that recently updated feed or the homepage of the website or whatever it might be. So by posting all of your chapters at once, you're robbing yourself of that opportunity to, get on that feed and in front of new eyes, depending on who's browsing that day. So for me, I think that one a day is really the maximum you need to be posting. I wouldn't go longer than one a week, like Alex said. I think that's pretty fair. The thing to remember also is, especially as you do more, you might wind up doing more than one series. I run 2 series myself. I do a chapter of each every 4 days, so that winds up being a chapter every other day. For me, I try to write a chapter every day, and that way I can take the spare and build a backlog for myself. I can post advanced chapters to Patreon, but really I don't see any need personally to try to get to daily posting. It also gives me more flexibility for things like, family emergencies or, running into an issue with the story. So give yourself a little bit of wiggle room, but stay on top of it.
Yeah, I would say that once a day is good. When I took one story off of Radish and put it on Wattpad for free, I was updating about 5 chapters a day because I had it written, and they were clamoring for more. And it's because it was written for as a serial. Everything was in very hard cliffhangers at the end. And I will say that is the one that got 1 million reads in like 5 weeks. But I also had a platform already on Wattpad, and Wattpad, the discoverability won't necessarily rise to the homepage. It's completely different. So I would say that once a day would have been good too. But if you take any time off, if you, like I went on with another book that I did end up, I think I posted 15 chapters in the first 15 days of this month, the final 15. I had taken a hiatus because of my day job a couple of times, and the readership dropped off, and it's still only like 200, 300,000 right now. And it's in a very similar trope to the million one. And I assumed that if I took longer, there would be more readers, but that was definitely not the case on Wattpad.
And I do want to add on to that with the hiatus thing. I found that by announcing the hiatus, you are able to retain more, especially when you give a definite end date, if possible. Although that can be, I've had to take a couple over the last few years for my health at various points. But one thing also, for platforms where the visibility on the front page makes an impact, one thing that I also like to do and try to do is make sure I'm not posting at the same time every update, so you get that chance to, be seen by all across the spectrum of American readers and Canadian readers, and then do one that's at a somewhat fairly odd hour to get in front of European readers. And since Reddit has a very large user base based in India, I try at least once or twice post at a good time for them as well, just to maximize, because people are fine, with the time update varying as long as the days are consistent. Also, something Casey said, the number of stories you can have with serialization is something you really want to consider, because I have been trying to kind of do a list in my head, and I have lost count. I do not know how many active projects I have. Not ones that are on hiatus. I would need to go through my records to see how many I have in some form of activity, and you don't want to do that.
Well, especially if you have that many series, readers are going to start expecting regular updates on all those series. So
Yes, they do.
How's that going?
I've had to put a couple on hiatus where it's like, hey, I'll be coming back to this, I promise, but I only have so many hours on in the day, and I cannot spend them all writing. I need to eat and sleep at some point.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. I've thought about, I've long had this idea in the back of my head to do an interconnected series, so each book is on a different platform, but I don't have the guts to do it just yet, but maybe soon.
That would be bold. I mean, if you do that, I'd love to see how that goes, because
it would probably be like Radish, Wattpad, and then one other, and it would be romance, set in like a mafia kind of world, and there would be mafia kingpins in different cities in each platform. So they would all have to, and then rotate it all into Kindle Unlimited.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That could be really interesting, though, because like one thing I'm looking at doing is finishing up some of my current serial projects, and then one project I have in mind in particular, establishing as kind of my forever serial, and this is the one that this is my only serial project, and I have a shared universe I've been building up with, and so my books will be in that same shared universe. So that way it would, I'm hoping people would be like, okay, I like this stuff and more about this universe, and so I'm going to read the books. But I'd have to finish my current ones first so my readers don't, hunt me down.
Well, to kind of expand on this then, what platforms have you found that are good for serialization? Do you have a favorite or somewhere that you consider a home base? And how do you feel that using these platforms compares to, say, using an author website?
Oh.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah. I have... So my home base is on Reddit. That's where I got my start. That's where most of my readers are and continue to be. That's kind of been my primary platform, so I know the best. And the reader community on Reddit is one of the friendliest I have ever seen in my life. They are super great about being understanding about things, and you'll lose readers if you don't update consistently, but you don't get people leaving you well, I'm out now messages. You don't get you'll get comments trying to help you improve, and sometimes the comments will be worded in a less than friendly manner, but that's very rare on Reddit. My brief experience with Royal Road was the only one I've gone to, and when I want to go back there, I found it to be, the criticism was often harsher. On the other hand, the tools to actually publish, because it's built for that, were light years better, and even the number of readers, because Reddit has no discoverability mechanic at all. It's its biggest downside. Whereas Railroad has that, so it is much easier to actually find readers and get them to, interested.
My home base really is Wattpad. I'm part of the paid stories program there, and I also have one of my books actually has been optioned by a German TV production company. Wow. And that Wattpad has been I can't say enough good about Wattpad. That same book is being printed next year, so they have a lot of opportunities, and for me, I know that those opportunities will not come. It's very unlikely if I'm an indie author. I've self-published. I've spent a lot in Facebook ads. I know the uphill battle of self-publishing in the contemporary romance space, which is very glutted. So Wattpad, I think it's, if you're a pretty good, pretty clean writer, it's easy to get noticed there if you are consistent and you respect your readers, and if you write steamy romance, obviously. And Radish is much the same. I really like the Radish app and the way it looks. It's very easy to read and very beautiful to read. The crew at Radish is doing some really innovative things with serials. And so I really like them as well. I've played around with tapas, but it's kind of more of a different, it's not what I write. It's just not my genre. And they really like anime or manga kind of covers, and it doesn't really translate for my books well. there's other apps. Kiss is another one that is supposedly doing well. I haven't explored that, mostly because I haven't had time at this point, and because Wattpad, more and more, a chunk of my books are, I haven't signed the rights over, but I've signed contracts on Wattpad, with Wattpad for those books. So, and the idea that Wattpad is becoming very, they're trying to sell a lot to various TV production companies and movie production companies around the world. So that carrot is worth it for me to be on there and have more free content than I normally would.
I'm Reddit based as well, just like Alex. Like we said, that's where we met. If he won't mention it, I will. We've been building out Reddit Serials as a subreddit within there as sort of that hub for serialized fiction, because Reddit doesn't have a discoverability mechanic. So that's really where my own attentions are focused in terms of marketing myself. I've tried Tapas. Like you said, it's entirely correct. They like their manga covers. They like anime style. What I've actually taken to doing is I will have multiple covers for some of my serials, where I will have one cover that might be in a more illustrated classic book style, and then I can get an anime, drawing made in color that looks pretty darn nice for $25 to $35, and put some typography on it myself, use that on Scribble Hub is another one that really likes anime style, and that actually helps my engagement a lot, I've found. So just thinking about who's reading it on each platform and what they might like, even if the story inside is entirely the same, changing how you market it can help that. The one thing I'll say, I always hear a lot of people say that they're just going to put their serial on their website. The difficult time with that is that if you put it on your personal website with no external traffic or with no other stories, yes, you have total control. Yes, it's just your story, but that means you have to drive 100% of the traffic to that platform. And that's always the tough part with, books and indie publishing, is being able to get eyes on it. So when you're publishing on your own website, you're basically, taking the full difficulty of publishing a novel anyway.
And I definitely want to piggyback off that, because that is extremely true. And also, the hardest thing in the world is getting someone to go to a different website. Like, traffic within the website is so much easier to get them to stay within where they already are than go somewhere else, especially for younger audiences where they are very used to all the scams and shadiness that happens. So if they trust the platform, they're going to stay there. And like, one thing we've noticed with Reddit Serials, I was going to leave a few to bring up, but that you have brought up, getting people, because before Reddit Serials, most Reddit authors had their own personal subreddits, their own little communities where their stories went. And growing those, you could grow with the initial boost off a story, but you wouldn't really get people coming in after that, especially after the first month, and it fell off all record of the, unless they went into the annual view and really dug deep for it. But with Reddit Serials, we're getting a lot easier time getting people to come to this place, because it's not come here if you like this story, it's come here and see if you like the stories. We have many of them. Take your pick.
One time, when I published the serial in ebook, when I published the 5-episode serial, I later on took the first episode and I sent it out as a newsletter, not the whole thing, but I actually did like a newsletter sequence for new subscribers. And so they would get 2 chapters a week of that 20,000 words. And that really worked nicely.
I think that's a really interesting tactic to kind of combine it with newsletter building. It, not specifically that, but it does remind me of another common thing that I see a lot that I would advise against, where I see a lot of people saying, well, I'm going to go on, Royal Road, or I'm going to go on Scribble Hub or Tapas, and I'm going to post like 70% of the story, and then I'm going to make them buy it for the ending. And what I found is a lot of these platforms that are based around web fiction, that's not the norm. Like, that's not what normally happens. The idea is that you're building a community that will buy your book because they want to support you. And so when, a lot of times those readers, at least on the platforms that I've frequented, will see you saying, well, now you have to buy the ending, and get offended. And think about it in that you've now made them mad and handed them a link to your shiny new Amazon listing where they can just go right on there and leave a 1-star review. So,
And they will.
and they will.
Yeah. I see a lot of romance authors saying, "Oh, I'm just going to put the first 3 chapters of my book on Wattpad."
That doesn't work. Don't do that.
That's not what it's about. You know?
Right.
Like, even the book that they love and has millions of views that's going to be published, you're right. They know it's going to be published because Wattpad made an announcement.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, "Oh, I love this book. I'll buy it when it's in paperback," because they've already read it for free, you know. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I have seen people do that does work, this is one of the authors we have read Serials who does this a couple times, because what he does is he won't publish in KU. So he will get to the 70% mark and say, hey, I'm going to keep publishing this on my usual schedule, but if you don't want to wait, it's already on Amazon. And since he's not Kindle Unlimited, he has that flexibility, and that has done really well for him, because then it's not, hey, I gave you most of the story for free, but now you got to pay. It's, hey, you can pay to get it right now, or you can just wait. Either way, it's up to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to work well. Something else I just want to mention, we're talking about platforms before I forget, because I keep forgetting. The one thing I would advise anyone when looking at platforms is read the terms and conditions. Because there are a lot that have some things in there that you know could cost you control of your creative work, and you really want to make sure that you are retaining that control.
I won't name
for contest.
I won't name any in particular, but look at the terms of service specifically. Like, even if you don't know legalese, even if you're not comfortable parsing it, look and see where the company is based out of. And frankly, a lot of them that are based abroad, it's not even so much that the companies that are based abroad are shadier, but if there are issues that arise, you are now relying on foreign courts and whatever the rules are in those foreign courts, and a lot of times they're not friendly to us. So just really consider that carefully.
If nothing else, consider how the country does with intellectual property laws and your home country. I would be fine I'd be fine going through, say, an Indian-based company, because India and the U.S. do pretty well with those kind of things if something comes up. But other areas would be a lot more make me kind of go, okay, let's read the terms and conditions. And there are some that to be an example of a good one, it's not serial fiction, but webtoons, I believe, based in China. And
no, I think they're based in Korea. They just bought Wattpad.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. They're based in Korea. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of proves the point, though. Korea has a really good relationship with the US, UK, EU for when it comes to resolving those things. And, that's why that one is going to be totally fine. But if the relationship is poor, and that's one thing actually Gimlet suffered from, a lot of the early lit RPG books were Russian novels that got translated later, and trying to, because there isn't an Amazon.ru, it's almost like there's two separate genres. There's the Russian genre and the rest of the genre, because the internet doesn't have that overlap as well. And a lot of the platforms there, the terms and conditions are in Russian, so I don't even know what they say.
Well, we will move on to the next question then, which will be that, do you feel that you are structuring your serial differently than you might a novel, or that there are differences in the structure, be it on the chapter level, on the book level? Do you feel that you're approaching them differently?
Or no, because I'm writing romance, and I think that, the ultimate goal in romance is for two people to fall in love. So it's going to be the same whether it's a serial or whether or not it's a book. I think that serials have more conflict, and I think that serials lend themselves more to melodrama and something that's more like a Spanish telenovela or a soap opera. So it's easier to go a little wild with the serial, whereas the books, I think I rein myself in a little more. So with books, I maybe don't, with just the straight books that I've written that aren't serials, I think that I rely a little less on the cliffhangers, but I'm pretty I'm a big fan of the end of chapter cliffhangers. Like I just like it in fiction. I like it in genre fiction. So, you know, even when I wrote my traditional mystery novel, when people say, "Oh, you know, I read this in one sitting, I flipped through it," I think a lot of that has to do with the end of the chapter cliffhangers.
I think I am about to, I can see to give me the stink eye. I'm about to make Casey a bit upset with me. I believe there are some differences. Now, for one that is less obvious for my genre, because the stat blocks are so important to it, when serializing, I try and include them in a lot of the updates. And then I will cut a lot of those out for the book version because, you know, when it's 2 days between, you want that reminder. But when you just saw the stat block last chapter, you do not want to then the next chapter get again because you're like, I just saw this. I don't need the reminder. But beyond that, I tend to, when I go to book, make my cliffhangers a bit less of hard ones and more smoother ones going into the next one. You know, because with Serial, I want that to be something that sticks in their mind a lot harder. But I feel if I don't soften some of them for the book version, it feels like for the reader, there's no lightening of the tension. It's just constant drama point, drama point, drama point. And I want to try and, for a book, smooth that out.
And I think that for me, and this is something that I've heard before, and I do have some feelings about this one, I think that when you have a serial, it is more high stakes in that if you do lose someone's attention, they're gone. So on that level, it does behoove you to make sure that there's always a line of tension being carried throughout the story. I'm not saying necessarily like a hard cliffhanger, but just that there's something going on and there, you know, this arc is not resolved. And so I will usually try to make sure that, you know, pull them through by their nose until at least the mini arc is ended and you can let them back down. I think that when I've read a lot of trad books, I see the same thing, in that, especially during the action sequences before you have that resting period, you do see the same thing. And I think that there are also people who, you know, I myself, when I'm writing a serial, I'm writing a book. I'm viewing it just like I said earlier, I'm a procrastinator. I'm viewing this as a method to let me write that book in a more encouraged fashion. There are other people who are viewing a serial as a totally different, independent construct that, you know, they have no intention of viewing it as a book. That's totally different. So it's going to be really individual for me.
And also to add to that, one thing I noticed I do in serials, and serials that tend to do better seem to do this, and that's more reminders as to what people, places, and things are than you would have in a book, because, you know, if I have rotating POV in some of my serials, and if the point of view was on these characters last, what will be in the book 3 chapters ago, because of the way I break things up, that could be a month ago in real time. So I need to reestablish what was going on, whereas in the book, I don't need that. In fact, it's only 3 chapters in the book. It might be frustrating for me to keep doing that. So I will cut those out if I have them.
Another thing that I think it's important to mention is when we're talking about cliffhangers at the ends of chapters, that doesn't mean you have to end every chapter with, you know, a gun to your main character's head. You know, a cliffhanger can just be that, you know, something is unsettling or, you know, you have some mystery or some tension. It doesn't have to be mortal danger every time. And if you do have mortal danger every time, it's probably going to come off as overdramatic fairly quickly. So
in romance, it really helps if you end the chapter at the beginning of the kiss. That's
that makes sense.
That frustrates and thrills the readers to no end.
That's a great way to put it. And cliffhangers have a bit of a bad rep sometimes because when people hear cliffhangers, they think about, you know, a TV show ending the season with the main character having a gun pulled on them, and you hear the, you know, gunshot and then find out in 6 months what's going to happen. But in serials, the cliffhangers aren't that strong most of the time, and shouldn't be that strong most of the time. But if they are that strong, you're getting the answer within at most a week. It's not going to be this huge looming pressure. You know, I try very hard to make sure that by the time I've finished what will become a book, there are no more cliffhangers. And then I put an epilogue that adds a cliffhanger for the next book, but that's more of a teaser than a cliffhanger.
Would you say that there are any pitfalls that you have seen with serialization? This might be something that serialization doesn't do well, or it could be something that you can screw up within serialization. Alex? You're grinning.
I've seen a few. I have seen a few. I've done a few. For me, one of them is you don't need to have a full detailed outline. I am very much a pantser in a lot of ways, so I often don't. But you probably should know where you're going to end, so you have some idea how to get there. Pick one of my favorite examples from my own work. What became my first long serial was a prompt response that was going to be 5 parts. It was going to be just 5 parts posted over a week, short story, done. And then I kept, saying, well, it'll be just 5 more parts. Just 5 more parts. The last update to that story was about 260 something, I believe. And I am going to still technically finish it in 5 parts. It's just 5 books. And that was because I really didn't have a solid or any ending in mind. And then at the point where I was supposed to end it, I threw in a twist that the sun was going to explode, which is the kind of twist you want to think through before you do it. Because now I had to solve for sun explosion, and that definitely elongated the story considerably. That's probably one of the primary ones. I'll let you guys go before I add more, because I have plenty.
Not finishing is obviously the biggest pitfall, but for me, I think that the last serial that I did, and readers stayed with it, but I took a point in the middle of the book where the couple was forced apart, and then I picked back up in the narrative 4 years later. And there were reasons why I did that, but I don't know. I feel like I might have rushed through, and the readers said that as well. And I feel like if I go back and rewrite on Wattpad, it's not unheard of to rewrite a book and to add to it and to edit it, and the readers will come back and read the rewritten version. So I feel like if I do return to that book, I want to expand it. Like, if you're not focused on a word count like you would be with traditional publishing or even ebooks, why not put in all the detail that you normally wouldn't? Why not? Like, that's what people really love, is the blow by blow of what the hero and heroine were wearing, what they were doing, the conversations they had. And sometimes it feels, as somebody, as somebody who's written books, that would be totally extraneous and unnecessary, and you just wouldn't even write it. But I think with serial fiction, especially if it's free, I think you can kind of play with it and not. I think that I could have played a little more, and that was a pitfall.
I'll come at this a little bit more from the mechanical side of things. First and foremost, and I would hope that this is at least not a mystery to many, but if you're going to be serializing, traditional publishing is probably not in the cards, because you're losing that right of first publishing. It doesn't matter if you're putting it on Google Docs. It doesn't matter if you're posting it somewhere and you're going to take it down. If you're publishing it for people to read, that is considered publishing it. I have seen people try and serialize things that they intended on traditionally publishing, and unfortunately having a nasty realization at the end of that particular arc. If you're going to be posting on Reddit, from just a more mechanical standpoint, if you're posting on HFY, any personal subreddits, make it easy for your reader to follow along, and make it easy for new readers to enter. When you post a chapter, go back and edit a next chapter button into the previous one. Like we've mentioned before, Reddit's not good for fiction. You have to do that manually. Include a link to your first chapter at the start of your chapters, so that if someone comes in, give them an ad copy, 2-line blurb, so that they can say, oh, this looks interesting, and then follow it back to the first chapter to ease that onboarding. Those are some things that can really, really help.
Absolutely. And also, I want to point that Tamara made, I think, was a really good point. a big mistake I see people do is they try and stick to traditional publishing constraints in terms of word limits and stuff, and you don't need to do that. In fact, you're hurting yourself by doing that because you're not taking full advantage of the format and the medium. And when you go to publish, you're going publishing most likely self or through a small press, barring exceptions, which in those cases longer is often better, especially going Kindle Unlimited. There's no need to stick into that narrow mold. And by the same token, if the serial is going that's going to be wrapped up quickly, it's going to be more of a novella at the end. You can also do that. Like, there's really no limitation on the length that you can have. That's one of the mistakes that people make is they, are talking about, the classic 3-act structure and how they're going to force their story into that. And it's like, you don't really need to. We're talking about, apparently books over 100,000 in genre fiction don't get picked up as first-time authors. It's like, well, yeah, because they're not going to spend that much money on printing costs on an unknown. That's going to, but you're self-publishing, so as long as it will fit within Amazon's bindings, which, as Casey knows, can get tricky if it's long enough, as long as you can fit it in that, then it's fine. People will be fine with it.
And that's a big thing, is I hear a lot of people approaching self-publishing and serializing even still from the perspective of trad norms. And I've heard a lot of people say readers won't read long books. My most profitable books were 220,000 words and 295,000 words up until they were unseated by an omnibus of mine that's 550,000 words. And you put those on KU, people don't have to click off. They can just binge read start to finish. Binge reading is a huge, incredibly profitable thing. And this is not me saying have fluffy books or write long to be long. But if your book wants to be long and it is for a good reason and it's doing something, you don't need to try and split them up into multiple books or cut down or cut plot points out. You do have that freedom, which is very liberating in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. And the fluffiness is a really good point too. Fluffiness is much worse in serialization because my biggest drop ever happened not during a hiatus, but during a point where I didn't know where I was going with the story. So I just wrote about 3 consecutive updates that were the characters in a bar just having fun. And the people who stuck with me loved it, but a lot of people left. I think it's because it's like, is he going anywhere with this? I don't think he is. Like, after a full week of nothing but bar scenes, they were like, okay, we're done. And I don't blame them, because I wasn't going anywhere at that point. In fact, that entire sequence got cut for the book version and completely redone because it was useless. And you can, in a book, you can get more forgiveness for that because, one of my favorite examples of that is in Wheel of Time, when, now granted, these books at this point were later in the series when they become more controversial, but there were 8 pages where he just described dresses and the styling in this one city. If it had been a serial, that easily could have been 2 or 3 updates where that was all that was happening, and no one would keep reading through that. For me, I read past that because I trusted that he would get to the point in a few pages. And I almost didn't get all the way past it, but I did, and he did get to the next thing. There never was a point to that sequence, but at least the next thing did happen. But in serial, you can't afford that.
In romance, in some ways that you can, because the readers fall in love with especially the hero a lot. Mm-hmm. Sexy hero. So I think that the more, and I will say to kind of to go there as a romance writer, I think in romance books, the sex scenes have to have a purpose and have to reveal something larger about the characters or their relationship or their situation. In serials, that's not entirely that. I don't think. I mean, I don't think that you need to have gratuitous and tons of sex scenes, but it can be okay just to have a sex scene for sex scene's sake in serial fiction, because that's what the readers, a lot of them do. The romance readers, my readers, want that. And so I think it's okay to just have a purely sexy erotic scene, whereas I would probably be a little more judicious in a book.
I think, I think that's a good point. And I think also, I would argue that that's not fluff in romance, because that's part of what they're there for, is the
Right.
characters,
Sure.
and for an example from one of my genres, it's something that I had to get used to, but for lit RPG and game lit, people love the systems, which becomes a character in its own right. So I feel very weird sometimes when I'm spending 2,000 words getting into system minutia, but that's what readers are here for. So that is not fluff, even though it feels like fluff, because it's about what they're there for. And the same with the sex scene and romance, or Casey, because you write high action,
yeah.
yeah, and so your long fight scenes could be fluff in a different genre, but they're perfect for what you do.
Right. I have fight scenes that might go on for 20 or 30 or 20 or 30,000 words of just fighting in various forms, and part of that is just recognizing what your readers are there for and what they're looking for, what's going to excite them.
Oh, one last thing, but it comes back to a point that Casey makes a lot, and I, really think is an important one. When it comes to any fiction, but even more so in serial, I think you are making a promise to your readers in terms of genre and what you are and aren't going to subvert in expectations and all that. And as long as you're filling that promise, you're going to be fine. And one of the biggest pitfalls I see serial writers fall into is they break that promise to subvert an expectation far too late in the game. And in a book, someone will keep reading because they want to see where you're going with this. In a serial where it might take a while to find out where you're going, then let it just be done.
Yeah.
So if you want to do that, you have to establish early on that you are going to be playing with expectations, so your reader knows early on, okay, I know they're going to be messing with conventions.
And just to be perfectly honest, I've had stories where, they were pretty popular and had a lot of subscribers, but I looked at them and the initial few parts, like one in particular, it was promising a time travel adventure. And I got 4 chapters in and realized this isn't time travel, this is bouncing between parallel universes, and that's actually where it's going. But at that point, I still had readers commenting, oh my god, I'm so excited for more time travel. Like, I'm not giving you that. So at that point, I had to step back and say, am I really going to be making them happy? Am I going to drag this out for another 20, 30 parts? That's my time wasted that I could have been writing something else, only for them to be disappointed by what I'm giving them. So sometimes you have to have a hard look at it and say, is this working?
And that will add, I'm sorry, this was well, but I have a lot. The one other thing I see serial authors do, one of the biggest mistakes, is becoming overly reliant on Patreon. And Patreon is great. It's part of how we're able to, do what we do. It's critical. But by the same token, I know of probably about 3 or 4 people off the top of my head who I'm not going to name, but I've talked to or people who talk to them who are tired of writing the one story they've been writing for years and years now, but they can't do something else because they will lose patrons. The patrons are there for that one story. And while some will stick around because they love the author and support the author, and you absolutely get those, a lot of people, especially if you've been writing one thing for too long, are going to stick around just for that story. And so either diversifying early or publishing as early so you have that second revenue stream of Amazon is very important, so you don't end up locked in like that.
Well, to jump to our final question here, do you feel that every serial needs an end, or can you have a forever story? And what do you see as the end game for your stories in general? Do you want to do publishing? Do you prefer Patreon? Is there something else?
My stories all have an ending. Romance has a definite ending to it. It doesn't lend itself well, and the readers want a happily ever after like that. It's just very hard to sustain a long serial, a truly long serial. And it works better if it's more romantic suspense or there's mystery involved, or if it's paranormal or science fiction romance, things like that. But straight contemporary romance doesn't really work well with a forever serial. The end game, I would love to be on Patreon. I was on for a while and had like 2 subscribers, and one was my dad. Romance readers are not as, maybe because there's just so much available in Kindle Unlimited and Wattpad and other sites, I have not found that romance readers respond at all to Patreon. I would love to do a serial just for Patreon, but I don't have the faith that it would work that well. So, like I said earlier, I would love to do a serial on 2 or 3 different platforms in the shared world of different characters, sort of like an ensemble cast, only on different platforms. That would be an ultimate end goal for my serial career, I think.
It sounded like I was down on Patreon, and I'm not. The way I view it, my end goal is books, which means my things have to at least have endings to their arcs. I need to give the readers resolutions. I need to give them something that they can, be like, okay, this has an end. Usually in the genres I write, it's the villain is defeated, but the story could go on with a new threat, or it could end, there. Either way does work. But books are kind of the ultimate one, because my ultimate goal, I would say, because that is the place where it's the largest platform. Just kind of one of my goals is to get as many eyes on my books as possible, because I want people to see them and read them and give me validation by reading them. But patron I don't see as an end goal. Your patrons are where your super fans can be, the people who are the most dedicated to you, and I adore them because what they also do is they give me a consistent baseline where, my Amazon sales can fluctuate wildly by, 50 to 75% in any given month. My patron will fluctuate, but nowhere near to those degrees, so it's my bedrock. It's kind of the, okay, I know I have this much. Thank you guys for that peace of mind.
And I think that for me, like I've said before, I'm writing books. Serials are just my way of, they're my structure for writing them. So for me, I do always have like an ending in mind for the story. I will never have, a shonen anime style series that just goes on for 800 episodes. I don't see that being me. But I do see myself, well, first off, I tend to say this is going to be one book, and then I look up and it's a 12-book series, and that's the thing that happens. So that's one side of it. I do personally enjoy like spin-offs and creating an extended universe. That's something I've been doing as well, is I have, a larger extended universe where I have several series that interact with each other and their characters might go back and forth. And that's really good from the perspective of continuity, because now I can tell my readers, well, this is a different story, and like I'm not bored because I'm writing, something new still, but they still have characters they like that can encourage them to make that leap to a different story. So that's a win-win for me. In terms of like the end game of finances, I do see myself as being more in the Amazon model than the Patreon model, partially because of that structure. I think if you do have like an 800 chapter series where it's just going to go on forever, Patreon can be really effective for that. You tend to, if you publish books, you'll see a dip in your patrons as they leave. But I do think that, especially for writing genre fiction, it's good to have a Patreon, because having that Patreon, I don't have a substantial income from that. But the income that I do have has allowed me to do audiobooks, because, every month I would just squirrel that away, and audiobooks are really, really expensive. But because of that, I've been able to do them. The other thing that I would say on this matter is, if you are thinking of doing Patreon as a genre author, the single most effective way to get patrons is to have advanced chapters. You can say, oh, well, my free chapters are up to chapter 10 right now, and for, $3, you can have 3 chapters ahead of that, and for $5, you can have 6 chapters ahead of that, or whatever boundary you decide is fair. And so by doing that, they're going to get the whole story for free anyway, but they get there faster. And so especially where you do have those really painful cliffhangers, you can usually lure some people into jumping ahead.
And the other thing, as also in general would always advise anyone is to never put all your eggs in one basket. Always have multiple, especially if you're doing it almost entirely digitally like we are, the risks of any one platform going under or, no longer supporting you or even getting banned. That's, happened a couple times where people have gotten false reports against them and been banned and had weeks before they could get back on the platform, and they eventually got back on because they hadn't done anything wrong. But that time frame was time where if they had been on one
They weren't
platform,
making
some of
money.
them were, no income. You really want to make sure you are as diversified as possible because A, that gets you the most readers, and B, it gets you the most security. If anything goes wrong, you have a fallback option, and then you have a fallback for the fallback.
All right. Well, that's our final question. So from here, we are going to move on into the question and answer session.